Now I'm ready to talk about the interventions themselves and the three outcome areas that we looked at. The first of which is children's early attachment security. Many people have described this as a primary task of early development. Before I go into it in any detail, I'm going to show it to you in action. So let's.
I'm ready to do that.
Keep talking, Dad.
This baby is something. She's something else. What are you saying? You see Grandpa? See Grandpa's face? Oh, you're touching Grandpa's face. You touched Grandpa's face. Let's try it again. Oh, you touched my face. Yeah. How did that feel? Did you like that? Oh, now you're touching your own face. Yeah.
Djokovic knows Murray in Beijing semifinal.
I know. Djokovic beat Murray? Good. I don't like Murray either. I don't like Murray, but I like Djokovic.
Oh, wow.
Are you going to play tennis someday? Huh? Maybe you will. Well, okay.
Okay, that person in the video is my uncle. I think he was 71 at the time. He did not go to attachment school. He did not go to baby talk school. These are things that parents learn how to do naturally. You see the baby sitting there being cute, cooing at my uncle, and he pulls language out of her. He responds, it's turn-taking. He even brings her into a conversation about, I think at the time it was the US Open. He lets her know who his preference is. And she will be, and by the way, I can only apologize because he's American. And this was a few years back when people just thought Murray wasn't very nice. But having said all of that, this is something that is natural. The assumption of attachment theory is this happens naturally because of the cues of the babies. So the baby's cues are things that are inborn, and parents' response to it is natural. Another thing that you saw there with my uncle is what we call infant-directed speech. He was modifying his speech so his granddaughter understood it. It's almost ubiquitous. You see 4-year-olds doing this with babies. Nobody teaches them how to do this. These are natural processes. Oh, I've done it again. So this is the theory of change, a very fundamental theory of change, of attachment theory, that you have these natural behaviors of children or babies when they're born that elicit a natural, sensitive reaction from parents. Parents respond in a sensitive, predictable way, and children come to feel a sense of agency and feel very positive about the world. They see themselves as being able to control, that's a strong word, but to elicit positive results from parents, and that gives them a feeling of security, and they take that forward with them in the world. A positive attachment relationship, or attachment security as we call it, is considered a protective factor for the ups and downs that will take place as people become older. An insecure attachment is not a mental health disorder, but it is considered a risk factor for one. So that's an important distinction to make. Insecurely attached children, it's not a death sentence. It's just maybe will make them more at risk for other problems. But it's something that interventions try to support. But as I just pointed out, the vast majority of adults know how to do this. You see that in all populations, it's about 66% of children are securely attached. And when you get to middle to upper middle class families, that goes up to 75%. In disadvantaged communities, though, or where there are serious parental mental health problems, it can drop dramatically to maybe 40%. So these interventions, by and large, try to target groups of parents who are at risk. I just said this is on a slide that you can look at when you go home. And this is the distribution of the 28 attachment interventions that we looked at in terms of their evidence. You can see that 11 of them targeted families where there was a known risk. 12 were offered at the targeted selective level, meaning for parents who are either socially disadvantaged or teen parents. And 5 were offered at the universal level. And only 5 were found to have evidence of being effective, and 2 were found to have no effect. Three of those interventions were available at the targeted indicated level, where there was a clear risk of, or an identified risk of an insecure attachment, either because there were child protection concerns or serious parental mental health problems. 2 of the interventions were for families who were at risk because of the mother's age, and 1 was offered universally. And that universal intervention, which seeks to break what we know about attachment, is an intervention called Family Foundations that was developed in the United States, but is currently running in about a handful of local authorities, actually right here in South London. It's an intervention that's offered to couples in an intact relationship who are expecting their first child. Now, that's very important eligibility criteria, because it's not for super at-risk families. In fact, if there is known domestic violence, you're automatically ineligible. You don't have to be in a heterosexual relationship, but you do need to be in an intact, committed relationship. The program is embedded in childbirth courses that take place for 5 weeks in the mother's last trimester. At those sessions, parents are in groups, and they learn basics about childbirth, including breathing and what to expect and all of that, childbirth options. But they also have about an hour session on how to communicate well as a couple, particularly around child-rearing issues. And this is really critical because probably the transition to parenthood is the most critical transition in the life of a family. You go from being a couple to being a family. And what this intervention tries to do is make that transition a lot smoother and help parents understand how that will impact the couple relationship. So once they've learned some of these strategies, they go and they have their baby, and then after the baby's 3 or 4 months old, they come back to get again for another 4 weeks, where they talk about how it's going, and they talk about how to refine strategies. And what the intervention has done now in 2 very well-conducted RCTs in the United States is they've shown that in the short term, it improves attachment-related child behaviors, particularly self-soothing. It also reduces interparental violence in the couple relationship on the conflict tactic scale. So that means that there's less bickering and arguing. And as the children become older, the program has evidence of improving the children's behavior at school, and then when they're 3, and then again when they're 7. So this is one of the few programs that's been evaluated twice with a good RCT that also has long-term outcomes. The second intervention is the Family Nurse Partnership Program. People have lots of questions about this because many will know that it just completed its first trial in the UK last year, and the findings were very disappointing. However, I would like you to keep, if you have any questions about that, we're happy to answer them at the end. But I will say quite briefly that it retained its 4+ rating with us because it still had 2 outcomes that were very important for us. And that was improvements in children's language, both at 12 months and at 2 years, and also into some cognitive outcomes. And those were the outcomes that we were looking for. Some of the birth outcomes and the things that it did not perform so well on were not really within the scope of our exercise. So we felt that it still retained its 4+, but I can get into the detail of that later. And then at the targeted indicated level, I told you before there were 3 interventions. They're actually derivations of the same model, which is parent-infant psychotherapy or parent-child psychotherapy. This is quite confusing because there are quite a few programs that have similar names, but it is the Alicia Lieberman model, which is actually the first model, that has this good and consistent evidence. So that was a surprise for us. It's not all interventions with the same name or aim to do the same thing are equal. This program has both child and parent outcomes, whereas some of the other models had parent outcomes but just don't seem to make any difference for children. at least in terms of preliminary findings. This intervention has, on a number of trials now, improved the attachment relationship, traditionally measured through the strange situation, but has also reduced parental symptoms of trauma. The intervention that I'm talking about here is Child First, which it works within kind of a troubled families type model where it's still coordinated by somebody very similar to a troubled families key worker who works with the parent to figure out what the parent needs. And one of the components is this parent-child psychotherapy alongside many other things. And an interesting thing in the Child First model is they did not look at infant attachment security, but they found that the program had benefits, again, in terms of children's language development and also in terms of reductions of child maltreatment. Parent-infant psychotherapy is available in this country, but this derivation with Child First is just, it's considered by many in the United States to be the new and up and coming program, but it has not come over here yet.